All right, hello everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. As we see people joining, we're going to give folks just a minute or two. If you could answer these two kind of poll questions. How excited are you for today's webinar? I know that I am very excited. And then if you had to choose, what is one of your biggest challenges right now? And we'll get started in a second. But thank you all for being here today. I see some responses coming through now. As a reminder, for folks who can't join live, if you want to share with friends, colleagues, teammates, the recording will be live on our website within a week. So feel free to share that as well. All right, I see those responses coming in. All right, I'm going to end the poll now. It's been like a minute. Most people are thrilled. They have a pen and paper ready for the webinar, so I'm going to end it now. Today's webinar is about celebrating trans leaders and how to be more trans inclusive employers. My name is Christina Giordano, she and her, and I am a senior partnerships manager at AllVoices. For folks who aren't familiar with AllVoices, we're an employee intelligence platform, and we really believe in systemically asking for, accepting, analyzing all kinds of feedback to build an intentional, great place to work and company culture. With that, I'm going to pass to Ari Luna, who is your moderator for today's webinar. So Ari, I'll pass to you.
Hi everybody, super stoked to be here. Like Christina said, my name is Ari Luna, and I'm super excited to introduce our panel here today of fabulous trans leaders. So panelists, could you please introduce yourselves and include your pronouns, your role, and the work that you do at your company? And also if you could include something that has recently brought you joy. Ebony, I'll pass it to you first.
Thank you, Ari. My name is Ebony, pronouns she, her, hers. I am Executive Director of California TRANScends. We support policies that are trans-centered throughout the state. We're also getting into direct services in counties that are red with minimal support to trans community. And so we will do like a ride share to take trans folks to their appointments. And we're gonna get a drop-in center for workshops and to create community in those areas. And then we'll get out of there and lead leadership to our trans community that's in those areas.
And what's brought you joy?
Oh, what brought me joy?
Besides
You asking trans folks what brought us joy? Oh my God, there's so much going on against us. But what has brought me joy? I was at Pride 2 weeks ago, Sacramento Pride. And there was an anti-trans guy who comes every year with LGBT people are going to hell. And there was a reverend, her name is Pam Anderson, just like Pam Anderson, the famous Pam Anderson. And she had her collar on and she had her robe on, and she's an Episcopal reverend, and she had God loves the LGBT people right in front of the guy. And I heard one trans kid said, I needed to see that, thank you. And so that brought me a lot of joy.
Thank you so much for that.
Also, Ari, can I add one more thing? I was with Anjali yesterday, and she was honored by the California state. And that brought me a lot of joy too.
Yes, congratulations, Anjali. And I'd love to pass it to you next.
Thank you, Ebony, for that love and the sisterhood. I'm Anjali Rimi, pronouns she, her, they, them. I wear a few hats. I am the president and CEO of Parivar Bay Area, America's only transgender-led, transgender-centering South Asian organization. I also work in corporate America in business development, in the wine industry, and sit on a few boards. And what brings me joy is all of those cumulatively allow me to exist as a proud, unapologetic transgender woman of color, an immigrant, a woman of color, and so many more identities that might tell me that I should be intersectionally burdened, but I refuse to believe that. Thank you, and pleasure and honor to be sharing space with each one of you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Natalie?
Sure. So hi, everyone. My name is Natalie Egan. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And my sort of day job, my title officially is CEO and founder of a company called Translator, Inc., where we build diversity, equity, and inclusion training and analytics technology for corporations, schools, and nonprofits. And I'm super excited to be here today. It's such an honor. There's a lot of joy in just being here, of course, with you all. To echo what Ebony said, there's so much going on working against us right now that it's sometimes hard to call out and really own or experience that joy. But there are a lot of, I'm very privileged. I have a lot of things that do bring me joy in my life, including my children. So they bring me joy every day. I had a lot of joy putting on this dress earlier. I thought this was really fun and colorful and affirming for me. But I think the thing I would probably call out that really stood out for me, and it's something that's sort of unique for me that I haven't had a chance to do before, is I actually got to go see a Katy Perry concert a couple of weeks ago in Las Vegas. And I mean, it just was so important for me. It was such an amazing experience, and it goes deep for me. I've been a big fan of Katy Perry since her first album dropped in 2008, I think it was, and Kissed a Girl kind of blew my mind. Like, how can she be singing about these things? You're not allowed to sing about these things. And so it was started to show me that there was more to the world. And to see her in concert in Las Vegas was probably one of the most amazing experiences of my life. So that brought me a lot of joy, and that carries with me. So thank you for letting me share that.
Yeah, thank you so much. I gotta ask, what's your favorite Katy Perry song?
Oh my God, I love that's a very hard question for me to answer. I like a lot of her new stuff right now. I would have to say, if I had to just pick one off the top of my head, I mean, actually, I think probably I'd have to say, if I had to pick one of all time, it might be Roar or Firework.
Nice.
Those are two really strong ones. But
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. And I'll pass it to Levi.
Yeah, hi. So Roar and Firework are my go-to, like, when I need to get pumped up to do something. So I appreciate that, and I'm excited that you got to see that, Natalie. My name is Levi, they, them, and I am a people leader, an executive people leader with over 14 years of experience, currently on the board of the Coffee Coalition for Racial Equity, previously Chief People and Culture Officer for a Berkeley startup in the coffee meets tech world. And I'm looking for my next job opportunity, and I had an interview yesterday at an on-site interview, which was bizarre but awesome at the same time. And it's a place that has that manufactures food, and we walked through there. I was on a tour through the plant, and the gentleman who was hosting me handed me a beard net, in addition to the hair net. And I looked at this thing, and then I was like, oh my God, I get to wear a beard net. Like, never in my life would I have thought a beard net would be something I would get so excited about. So that that brought me a lot of joy. And I have to say, like, I am so thrilled to be here with this like beautiful panel. I'm a little hot under the collar, so thank you for letting me join y'all.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you so much, everybody, for sharing your moments of joy and who you are and the work that you do. I wanted to connect back to something that's like a theme that's sort of going on in this discussion of joy and gender euphoria amongst, like Ebony said, the hard stuff that like trans folks face every day. And I wanted to ask, within an institution, what was your experience of feeling like you were being celebrated and embraced? Maybe when you felt seen or heard or understood. I can pass it to Natalie.
Yeah, so this question I had to think about a little bit, and I've had to explore. I mean, I've been very lucky to have a lot of great moments. So I was really trying to think of one that I could share that I think would be special for everyone here to hear about. And I think what came to mind was I had this opportunity maybe like 3 years ago to go to a event that was put on by Bumble, like the dating site. And they had actually created something called the Bumble Fund, which is a specific investment vehicle designed to invest in marginalized, underrepresented female founders of tech businesses. So, so Bumble ended up investing in my company, which was super cool and affirming and in and of itself. But they invited me to their first annual Bumble Summit. And the whole idea behind it was, what if women had invented venture capital? Which in and of itself is a very disruptive thought, because venture capital is a really broken system and very male dominated and all kinds of challenges and problems with it. It's very antiquated. And the whole weekend was about was this experience that was focused on women founders connecting, people that identified as women with each other to grow their businesses. And it was an unbelievable experience. It was like nothing I'd ever done in my life. It was 5 diamonds, 5 stars, all the way across the board. I mean, they flew us out first class. They had limousines pick us up at the airport and bring us to this beautiful, winery / hotel up in Napa Valley. And, but it was all really powerful women in venture capital investors. I mean, Serena Williams was there, along with a lot of other celebrity investors. And this was pretty early in my transition for me, and I felt very out of place. Like I didn't feel like I should be there, it was, talk about imposter syndrome. And so it was a very hard space for me to step into and own that. And because everybody, I mean, I think almost everyone else there was at least like presenting as cis. I mean, I didn't have a conversation per se, but I think I might've been the only trans identified individual there. Not 100% sure about that, but it certainly felt that way as I entered that space. And it was so affirming for me, like at the end, right? I mean, just everybody was so embracing and welcoming of me, and ended up getting a really important investment out of that from a woman named Jackie Zahner, who runs an organization called She Money that invests in women-owned businesses, women-identified individuals. And she actually just published an article earlier this week on her LinkedIn, sort of influencer feed that details how we met in a hot air balloon, which was really, and so I ended up pitching her in a hot air balloon over in Napa Valley. It was this unbelievable experience. But she ended up investing in my company, and you all should check that out if you want to read about it. But I'm probably taking up too much space right now, but that's what came to mind. And it just showed me what's possible and where we're headed. I mean, I didn't even think I could exist not that long ago. And to be able to walk into a space like that with women investing in women was just changed my life. So I just wanted to share that. And thank you for asking the question. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I really appreciate that sort of perspective of going from just existing even to just like to to thriving and like really being a part of this community and what that felt like. So thank you so much for that. Ebony, can I pass to you and ask like when was a time that you felt embraced and celebrated?
Yes, Ari, thank you. Yeah, I like this question because these things are important in an employment setting and as executive leadership as trans people. And so I like what Natalie said, investing in our work is very important. And that's a form of celebration. I believe in monetary celebration and celebrating us monetarily and supporting our work with resources. That's a form of celebration. And so I'd like to go into my previous employer right before I started California TRANScends and doing advocacy work. I worked at the California Endowment, and I was the first openly Black trans woman and trans employee there. I'm sure there's been others that weren't open, but I was the first open trans employee. And one of the first Black trans women that was working in philanthropy in the nation. So we are even an underserved community in philanthropy as well. But Daniel Zagale, who brought me in at the endowment, was kind of a rebel rouser, was kind of the type that was pushing back in the way that philanthropy showed up in community and believed that those who were getting funded should also be at the table and giving out resources to our communities. So he brought in a lot of activists to grant funds to our community. So just like Natalie, I had never worked in philanthropy. The California Endowment, while they put out kind of progressive messages as an institution, they were kind of conservative. They didn't have conservative values, but they ran their organization the way philanthropy runs most organizations, with it, which is conservative with the resources, conservative in how staff shows up in community. So I, just like Natalie, I had imposter syndrome because I felt I didn't belong. And I had never worked in that type of space. And so I came in with my head down. I came in feeling out of place in that environment. And even in that work, I thought I wasn't good enough. You know, my history prior to that was direct services. And prior to that, I was a client to a lot of these organizations that support homeless youth, that support sex workers. I have both lived experience and I have community service experience. And so that was kind of a radical step and a radical move to hire a Black trans person to delegate funds because we're also kind of low on the totem pole when it comes to LGBT community as people that have kind of community value. And so I had imposter syndrome. I thought I didn't belong. I kind of saw my value as being less than other people. But by the time I left the California Endowment, I had a newfound freedom. I had a newfound superpower that I didn't know existed inside me. And so I feel like philanthropy still is Black trans women of color, trans people, period, is underrepresented in philanthropy. Only 3% of every dollar given to organizations go to trans-led organizations. And that is horrible. Can we at least get $1, to every organization? And so it felt like just a powerful move, and I got to get a mural up of a Black trans woman that was killed in Sacramento, China Gibson, through the endowment. And also the mural talked about the epidemic of Black trans women getting murdered throughout the United States. They had a little piece on the mural about the epidemic. And also the mural had China Gibson's mother holding her, and the mural says, "Protect Black trans daughters." And so that humanizes our experience. And it's in a urban neighborhood where it gets seen a lot. And so the endowment supported that. So they supported my work, which was very important to me.
Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate those perspectives on working through that imposter syndrome, and also like working towards like inclusivity and being brought into spaces that normally aren't built for us and aren't made for us, and what that looks like. And I wanted to ask, actually, I want to pass it over to Levi. I wanted to ask you, can you give an example of how you as a leader and a people operator have opened up processes or tried to include folks in a system that wasn't built for them?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the question. And Natalie and Ebony, thanks so much for sharing. I feel really touched by your stories. And, in terms of tangible structural change, outside, like, I'll say it still needs attention. So in gender neutral language and pronouns in email signatures and otherwise. But really where I feel like that starts is, from the very beginning when an organization is recruiting, how do you write your job descriptions or your job posts, and what images are on your website or on your careers page? So what is the impression you want to, or perception you want people to have of your organization, is a good start. And then I think onboarding is so critical to really, embedding that kind of culture into all new hires. And then when those new hires learn about that culture, then they're going to welcome in the next set of new hires and already be up to speed. And so more tangible structural things, like tactical things, are during onboarding, sharing code of conduct and behavioral expectations, talking about pronouns, talking about bathrooms. How does the organization use bathrooms? There is no detail that is too small to consider when you're talking about psychological safety and creating an environment that is open and welcoming. And so those are some things. An employee handbook doesn't have to be so dry, and it does need to be a legal document, but I believe that folks should be adding a page about not touching, laws, hopefully in your state, and if not, your company policy around touching hair, and or using pronouns, dead naming, things like that. I believe can be pages in handbooks or other like cultural playbooks that can become reference material. So if people are wondering, like, I wonder how we do this here, they can look and they can be reminded. And I think that's really critical. I'll say another piece is leadership training should go even farther. And I believe bringing in an organization that does this is really critical, especially because, asking your own team to do that kind of work to teach your team how to behave and how to treat people, I think is a big burden on, your trans and non-binary folks, and Black and Brown and Asian and Pacific Islander. And, I just believe don't add more pain and burden. So there are folks like Natalie's company and a lot of places where you can turn to who actively say, let me help you do this correctly and do it well so that it's, it lasts a long time and can, and especially through growth. I think a lot of times, growth can and speed of growth equals the degradation of a culture that started out as welcoming and warm and wonderful, but then as soon as more money comes in or more, you pick up speed, you have to mind the culture. You have to put your arms around it and nurture it through change. It will not take care of itself. So yeah, just a couple of notes on some tangible things.
Thank you so much for that. Those are incredible examples. Anjali, I wanted to pass it to you too, to a similar question, including what are things that employers could do better to be more inclusive of trans folks, but also a lot of your work, and I know at Parivar focuses on health equity and health access. What can employers do from a benefit perspective to really be inclusive in what they're offering there too?
Yeah, thank you for this conversation, Ari, and everybody already chimed in with great inputs. My take is very simple. You got to be able to do moderated activism and advocacy at a workplace. And the burden still remains with transgender folks in most instances. As somebody who was fired a few times over for showing up as myself and ended up being stateless, I can tell you that it goes beyond guidelines. It goes beyond transition documents. It goes beyond having BRGs that are going to fly the pride flag high and mighty. It starts and begins and ends with having sustainable programs, benefits that are going to start by centering transgender associates, not the other way around, where we will embellish or add transgender benefits, but get then selective on a few things. And it also kind of goes beyond the fact that we all carry an identity and a story. And at a workplace, everybody is striving to build that story and tell their story, but how are we driving equity? That's so important. And I always go back to these four things. Like, you can be the inclusion guru at a workplace, but you also got to be ready to be intervening, having interventions. Some people don't like that term, but we got to have those interventions in place. And we've got to get folks involved. And when I say involved, it's got to be leadership that's involved and finally integrated. We got to make sure that we are integrated into the work of whether it's normalizing pronouns or all gender restrooms. We got to make sure that if a trans person is walking through the door, their competency is never going to get overshadowed by their identity. And I speak to through all of this after being closeted as a trans woman for over a decade in workplaces, and only then seeing myself grow up the ladder. And then actually, finally, after 17 years of being in corporate America, being able to start in a completely new industry and be totally open as a trans person, and really being able to have these conversations that are, as I always say, assertively aggressive or aggressively assertive, based on how the person across from me is receiving that message and what the intent is they're coming from. I work for some of the Fortune 500, Fortune 5 companies, and I can tell you that if we were to rank them based on their transgender, trans-affirming workplaces, I think they would all rank backwards.
Thank you for that. That's really insightful, and I really appreciate those the inclusivity and intervention and like the involved and the integration. And I think that yeah, a lot of people don't want to have those conversations, and so I think it's important to do that. And I wanted to ask, so we've talked about inclusivity in a couple of different ways now, but we know that no group is a monolith and that we can't think of inclusivity in silos. How have you seen companies successfully lean into being trans inclusive in a really intersectional way? And I'll pass it to Ebony.
Thank you, Ari, and thank you, Anjali, for the powerful word. Yeah, Anjali always brings it. We've done workshops together, and I'm in awe of Anjali. So I like this question because transgender people are not a monolith. And people often check off specific demographics. They check off their black box. Oh, we have Black employees. Oh, we have some trans representation on our staff. But we are intersectional. So there's trans folks that are neurodivergent. There are trans folks that have other disabilities. And so when you think of inclusivity, you have to think about the intersectionality. And also, I work in advocacy work. And so I often see silos in advocacy work, silos with climate change, silos with racial justice. And often they don't think of trans people that care about climate change because climate change affects all of us, whether you're trans or not. And racial justice affects us as well. There's Black trans representation, there's brown, there's Indian. And so I'll go back to the endowment. That is something that I learned at the endowment because I have my own programming around professionalism and being seen and wanting to fit in with the environment. But actually, Dr. Ross, who's the executive director, who's the president of the endowment, said, Ebony, you need to think outside of just being trans and think about the intersections and think about a trans person that is working in climate change. Think of yourself as a trans person that can bridge those two. And so even with my work here, I have instituted intersectionality, neurodivergent trans folks advocacy, advocacy around climate issues, and thinking outside the box and broadening those things. But you also, as an employer, need to make sure that there's a safe space for us in our intersections. I often say that trans people live on the margins of the margins. We're not just marginalized, we're rejected by other marginalized communities. And so once you answer the needs of folks that are further marginalized, you answer the needs of the communities that's coming inward on those margins. And so that's important. As an employer, workshops are important. Bringing in people like Anjali, who has expertise on training staff about hiring and not just needing the policy wording, actually living the values of acceptance and inclusion. We have the speech down. We know how to give a good spiel, inclusivity and da-da-da-da-da. But how is your company exhibiting those values?
Thank you so much. I think that values conversation is super crucial, and also always operating from, the margins first, and really bringing those folks in is always critical. Anjali, can I pass it to you for the same question?
Yeah, I want to, kind of build on the DEI workshops I've done. I've done over 100, and I've done from really large groups to sitting down a CEO or a CFO, taking them on my motorcycle while we were doing this diversity training and telling them, like, what does it really mean to have their assistants to put their pronouns in their email? It could save lives. And how do you tell them that journey? That storytelling is so important, because like Ebony said, we can all have the best language, and every company wants to prevail and prove that they're socially responsible, they're prevailing in that space. But how do they truly make sure that they're hearing it from our lived experiences? So my way of going into these workshops is to actually relate to their needs. For example, I regularly train intake coordinators and nurses with the Asian Women's Shelter. And one of the key things is understanding that there are queer people, trans people on that side too, like on the other side of the desk. And how do they reflect or connect when they have a duty or responsibility to do to the person that's walking in for support? And then you're looking at the intersectionality of being Asian. And so, you know, there is all these identities that are competing. Like when I go into workshops, sometimes I'm only talking about racial equity, or I'm talking about LGBTQ, but I'm so like swayed to talk about transgender because that's my identity. And I keep looking in the audience to see, or in the class to see if there's trans folks, because I also want to be sensitive to that fact that I'm not the one that's going to talk about the entirety of the transgenderism and that journey. So I think there is a balance to be had there. I would also say that our own individual experiences inform us in very different ways. So there's the educated, and then there is the ones that have learned things through the art of living, or whatever you may call it. So when you go into these spaces, especially in a leadership role, especially in a decision-making role at workplaces, how do you actually define or that balance is very, very important for the most marginalized person in our workplaces.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I think that idea of really having folks who are the furthest out on the margins, really centering them, is always really important to me as well. And I really appreciate the concept of like storytelling as a way to like bring folks in and help guide them on this journey, because we're all on a journey, right, of like what inclusivity and like what equity looks like. And so I really appreciate that. Natalie, I want to ask you this next question. So in 2021, 33 states have introduced more than 100 bills that aim to strip transgender people of their rights across the country. The Human Rights Campaign notes that at least 117 of these bills have been introduced that target the transgender community. Some orgs have come together to make a statement regarding responding to these disturbing pieces of legislation. What role do employers have to play in either responding to these policies directly and/or responding to the current time by reevaluating structures such as total rewards, benefits, and more?
Yeah, so this topic and just the volume of these bills and the anti-trans, kind of GNC, gender nonconforming legislation that's happening out there is horrifying, right? It literally and it's with me all the time, and it surrounds me. I mean, I can't like shut it off. It's every time I log into the internet, right, that I'm seeing this stuff, let alone just navigating in my community. But it's all around us. It's 360 degrees, and it's wearing me out, right? It's wearing all of us out. It's exhausting and it's depressing. And it's you can't stick your head in the sand. We as a community are just, always aware of what's happening around us, and most cis folks are not. They just don't realize it. Like they don't realize the subtlety of the attack. And so I just sort of want to start there. But in terms of the role that, corporations, organizations, academic institutions, nonprofits play, it's critical. It's the biggest lever that we have to institute change. And, I don't, we cannot rely on the government. I mean, as much as I think that the new administration has made progress against, many of the anti-LGBT, anti-trans, work that was done under the previous administration, we have to rely on corporations, organizations, nonprofits, et cetera. It's the biggest lever that we have to drive change. And, there's a lot that we can do through policy and programming, and I'm very optimistic about that, but it's ultimately not what's going to change the world, right? I mean, it's going to take time. Like, this is a painful time, and it often seems unjust or unright, like it's not the right thing, but it's actually, to kind of look at it from a meta level, it's actually, it is actually, there's sort of, it's like appropriate for where we are, right? Like, this is a time of great change. Like, there's forces that are coming together that are very disruptive, and it's not going to be easy. People are going to get hurt. People are going to lose their lives. Like, we see it every day, but like, I look forward to a future, and, hopefully I'm around to enjoy it. But in, 15, 20 years, hopefully when all of the work that we're doing today is going to have actually made a difference. And that's the manifestation of everything. It's not just, a company creating a policy. I mean, there's companies out there that have great policies, but when it comes down to it, like actually in the weeds, like on the front lines, like people don't feel those policies, like that, that it doesn't mean they're not going to be discriminated against or harassed or feel some sort of threat to their physical or psychological safety because XYZ, megacorp or smaller organization has a policy in place that, theoretically protects us. It's progress, but it's not going to change things. I think of the biggest lever I think that we as individuals have, or the biggest tool that we have inside of these the organizations that can yield this is, to me, is representation, right? It's storytelling. And it's these types of opportunities today to change people's hearts and minds. Like, that's where empathy kicks in, right? And the problem with empathy is, there's two problems, right? One is you can't have empathy without self-awareness. And you also, you need to be able to, hear these stories. So there's plenty of stories out there, but people can't hear the stories because they're not aligned to their own self-awareness. Like, they don't understand their own identity. And that's sort of a problem that, we're working on, just to kind of talk about Translator for a second. Like, how do we use technology to scale empathy? And so we're trying to get people to understand their own identity and their own lived experience first, right? Like, that self-awareness is critical in order to get those people to then be able to hear these stories, to be able to show up, on a webinar today and hear these stories and actually have them mean something. Because oftentimes we're in echo chambers, right? We're talking to the same people that already know this. Like, maybe there's some people in the movable middle, but the bigger challenge is, how do we get people to hear these stories? How do we get them to understand their own identities so that that becomes sort of a channel to hear other people's stories? And, I'm very optimistic about it. I truly think with technology today that we have an opportunity, like, to change the world. We can share stories like globally in a nanosecond, right? That's never been possible in the history of the human race. So what we now need to do is kind of work on the conditioning to enable us to hear those stories. And that's where we're gonna move the needle. But in the short term, yes, corporations, they should be looking at all their policies and how can they make, their environments more inclusive. What kind of employee resource groups, business resource groups can they put in place? What kind of policies, training, et cetera. But at the core, I think it comes down to representation. And I think that, for trans folks, there's this idea, like, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And, we need to have trans folks in higher levels of the organization, in visible roles. If they're not working there, maybe they're in consulting roles, maybe they're telling stories, but we need that representation. And I think that as that snowballs, people will destigmatize the sort of trans identity. Like, that's what's really important. And one last little thing, just on this note, a good friend of mine named Joe Shiner, he is also a trans entrepreneur, but we've sort of created a very early stage, trans leadership resource group that really right now in its very, very small form is for trans CEOs, trans and gender nonconforming CEOs of tech companies, raising venture capital. It's designed to be sort of a support group, but our vision for it over time is to grow it so that it is, so anyone in business really, and if you're, any trans or gender nonconforming identified person or individual could become a part of this support group and connect with other people like them, at different points in their journey. But the ideal of the whole thing is to destigmatize the trans identity in the workplace. Like, that's how, like, we need representation to do that. Like, policy is not going to do that. We need visibility. We need people growing through the ranks in trans and gender nonconforming outward facing roles. And that's what's going to make change. So thank you for letting me share that.
Yeah, thank you so much. I agree about it's representation matters, and also supporting. It's not enough to just like say that you support trans folks at a place, but like, are they rising through your company? Are they in positions of leadership? Like, those are some of the key markers that we're looking for. Levi, can I pass this question to you as well?
Yeah, sure. This is the role of employers to get involved.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is a big. I discovered the the third rail of this when there was the trial, a certain trial. I'm just not going to use the guy's names. I don't want to give it any more press than it already has. There was a certain trial, guy got acquitted, and it was very disturbing, another disturbing outcome. And I spoke through email to the company as an executive for the company about what we as a people team could offer to support folks who are really struggling with this news, and that it was disturbing, and that I specifically addressed white team members who wanted to be allies, what they could do. And I listed a bunch of resources, and I came under terrible fire for creating more drama, for highlighting a group of people and singling them out. And it was one of the most disappointing. I mean, I've had some very disappointing things at work. It was at the top of the list, among others. Because then the conversation became, we don't talk about politics at work. And we've all had these conversations. Human rights are not politics. Killing people is, people deserve to live no matter where they go and what they do and what they look like or who they love. Like, that is not politics. Those are human rights. And so I think it is a challenge as a people leader to, and a trans person to advocate and to come out and say, I don't believe we're doing the right thing here. I believe that not talking about politics is coded language when facing an executive team that's filled with people who do not look like me or identify as anything close to how I identify as. And so I think that it is, and I think it's a company's duty to take part in these actions. I think it's a company's duty to, if you're a company saying that you have a certain kind of culture and you're welcoming and inclusive and you do all this work around DEIB and you pack your benefits plans with all kinds of stuff, but then you don't stand up against bills that are hurting people and harmful to people. And you don't stand up and say what your beliefs are as a company because you're afraid you're not going to make enough money, you're not going to get the users or the customers that you want to meet the needs of your VCs who are expecting a 10x return, or your board who is expecting a 10x return. I think that it's incredibly challenging to not be the owner of the company or the CEO and then have to face that and be the only advocate for discussing these things and bringing them up. And every time, yeah, the list of bills, like, let's talk about it. I want to, there were mornings I would wake up and I would just immediately Slack, yep, another person dead. Let's do something, another, here's another resource to, a group to join. There are groups of cis white people who are actually doing something. And that's what I shared with my company. And I was just like, why would you not, if you're a cis white person, why would you not join this group of people taking action? Why would you say, anyways, I'm getting animated about this topic because it's hurt me to advocate and to bring these things up. And I don't want that to ever happen to people, but business practices and processes and HR, legacy business processes and practices, legacy, the money, Natalie, you brought this up, the money, the VC money, it's all coming from the same, they all know each other and they got each other's backs for sure. It's really disturbing, and it's hard, very, very hard to change those legacy racist systems. And so, I wish I had more to say about, steps to take. I just think, safety first, take care of yourself, because when you're not feeling safe, it's really hard to do the work, but you got to have a job, so, advocate as much as you can, get allies, get people talking, and become the majority in the company to push the minority who are not wanting to do anything about it.
Thank you so much for that. And I really appreciate that perspective that, the personal is political, and that our lives are politicized every day, and that, like, being told to ignore that is absurd. And also the point of, we're not in this alone. And I think as we come to the end of our time, I want to ask, we want to get other folks involved too. Shouldn't just be on us, especially as like marginalized folks. Like, so to ask y'all, each of y'all, what is your call to action for employers and/or employees to be more trans inclusive? And Ebony, can I pass it to you first?
Yes, Ari, this has been fabulous. Okay, this is the right group. Y'all come waking it up, honey. I first want to say, sometimes within the systems that we work in, we are beholden to the CEOs, the board. So you have to make sure that whatever you do to kind of rock your company's boat, that you still have your job at the end of the day. And that means sometimes moving inch by inch and not going the full mile. So I just want to say that as a preamble. So I also want to add that sometimes we have to challenge our thinking around how things should be. And sometimes we have to hold ourselves accountable as people that hire people, and around professionalism, around intersectionality. And, as a Black person that navigates the world, I'm seen as less valuable. Just that Black piece alone, I'm seen as less smart if I don't talk like everyone. I'm seen sometimes if I say hi the wrong way as someone that is violent, someone that has, angry emotions. So it is important as employers, as HR folks, to kind of, I like the word decolonization, kind of decolonize our thinking around professionalism and dominant culture, ways of being. Somebody took a chance on me. I didn't have all the language right. I didn't walk just like the other employees. Because honestly, there's other Black trans people that are able to navigate dominant culture systems, because some of them went to college, some of them, had some type of institutionalization in programming that they're able to navigate those systems. But there's the term called code switching in POC communities, because sometimes we have to shift our language to fit what's dominant. So I would say, take risk. Start decolonizing the way you're thinking about employment and who to employ, and make employment opportunities accessible. Read up on, what's current. Sometimes we have to challenge our thinking around gender identity, neurodivergence, and make sure we create spaces that those communities have a place in our workplace. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that perspective. And I fully agree, decolonizing our mind is the best place to start. Anjali, can I pass it to you next?
Thank you, Ari, for moderating, and Levi, Natalie, and Ebony, honored to share the space with you. I'll sound a little controversial, and I'll tell you that companies are here to make money. That's the truth. They want employees who can work hard, who are productive, who can conform to their policies. So if a company is on a journey, a DEI journey to build equity, let's be empathetic towards that, because transgender people are the most kindest souls on this earth. So I would really say, that was one of my biggest learnings, is working for companies and expecting them to code switch or signal boost and do something right off the bat and be able to change things overnight. Like as simple as even getting a temporary all gender restroom, or something as simple as actually getting name tags when I showed up to a workplace and said, this is how I'd like to be called from today. So I think it's important that we give that grace, but equally hold that accountability meter with progression seen. And I think that's what I would really call on the employers. I call them out to call them in to say, you have got to make sure that you're on that journey wherever you are. But make sure that you're genuine, authentic, and being accountable. If you cannot do it, just say so. We are enough transgender people getting killed in this country, with over 300 LGBTQ bills, and majority of them removing us from spaces of sports and employment. It's employers' responsibility. But on the same token, I'm going to tell you that if it's a startup that really doesn't have the bandwidth to get through its tasks and protocols and SLAs, then I would not expect them to be writing affirming letters to the Congress and such. But everybody has their activism in different ways. And finally, I will say that, what I would like to tell companies is really, really be intentional in actually centering transgender folks with opportunity. I was once responsible to hire a team of 300 people across 6 locations. And as much as I tried to get diversity candidate pools and the slates being very diverse, it just didn't happen, because our folks don't even have access and awareness to all these opportunities. So you're gonna have to put more resources behind becoming the rainbow inclusive and transgender inclusive, rather than expecting it to just fall from out of the sky. It's not going to happen. You're gonna have to invest, and you're gonna have to use your privilege to actually bring us to spaces and look past things like Ebony said, look past the degrees, look past all these other qualifications that are so stereotypically required to be applying for a job, especially appalling as it is for many state and federal jobs. You know, it's like a minimum qualification of this, minimum qualification of that. Well, you have to realize that most Black, brown folks don't even have access to basic food, housing, and shelter. So a lot for employers to learn, but I'll also say it's a lot for employers to do as well, as they're trying to deliver on their profits and EBIT and all those aspects. So it's a two-way street. But I welcome every employer, every employee of an employer who's listening, that, you know, when you invest in transgender people, when you bring in trans folks that are, you know, that are going to be uplifted, retained, not just hired and leave after 2 months, you will see the best productivity, because we are hella grateful, I'll tell you that, and committed and unapologetically trans. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I loved all of that, especially the trans, you know, be transparent when you're called in. Loved all of that. Natalie, can I pass it to you?
Sorry, I was on mute. So yes, and I will try and be quick. And I've actually sort of, this is sort of a summary of what everybody else has already said, but this is what I would usually say in this situation. So, you know, we're talking about sort of what else can we do here? As I mentioned earlier, representation matters. So like hashtag representation matters. But beyond that, with corporations, like recommendations I would make, you know, this is assuming that you've done some of the groundwork, but it doesn't forgive you from not doing it. But I always say hire us, right? I mean, I think we've all kind of echoed that a little bit here, but, you know, hire us. And, you know, if you're a hiring manager out there, hire us. You know, be intentional about it. Like we're very loyal. We oftentimes don't have the skills that, you know, inherently, but we need people to take a chance on us. And, you know, we will grow and we'll learn. We're very dedicated, very loyal group of people. But if you can't hire us, I say invest in us. And I don't mean invest in us like give us cash necessarily, although that would be nice. But I mean, like invest in our community, right? Like invest in our people, invest in helping us get opportunities, which kind of brings up to the next one, which is educate us. Like if you can't invest in us, then educate us. Like give us opportunities for education. You know, educate yourself along the way. You know, and at the core, if you can't do either one of any of those first things, I would say just respect us. You know, and at a minimum, like use our pronouns correctly. Like that's just the most basic, you know, respect that I just ask, you know, people respect us. And one of the most basic ways to do that is to use our pronouns correctly. So I'll hand it off to whoever is next.
Yeah, Levi.
Yeah. Stop using the word professional. It's coded language to refer to the way people look. Anjali said this, other folks have said this, to the way people, you know, speak, sound, where they come from, what they drive to work, or if they walk, or like professional is coded language a lot of the time. Culture fit can also very much be coded language. So just get some help from folks who do this work, like this entire panel, and start telling them the truth about what you don't know and get help. And I, you know, because I find like, you know, especially like cis white folks, you know, don't know what they don't know, and then act out of fear, and then end up either with like toxic positivity or just toxic, you know, cultures. And it you know, I guess in this you know, in this country, you can make money doing that and have a successful business, but do you really want to be like that? You got to make a choice.
Levi, thank you for saying about the word professional. I've never heard that, but you're absolutely right.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And thank you so much, everybody, for all of your perspectives today and everything you brought to the table. This is incredible. And I'm so grateful that I was able to be here to witness this. And I guess I'll pass it back to Christina.
Yep. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. The recording will be up within a week on our website, and really appreciate you all joining. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Loved it.
Yeah.
Thanks, panel.
Thank you, panel. Amazing. Bye.